Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
So, we were talking about before we started recording that I think is something that I really want to explore because it's come up several times, and you're actually the third person I've talked to about this in the past few weeks about honoring this human experience and honoring our body in the sacred container of our body, whether that's the breath or grounding in Mother Earth. And in doing that, we're really opening ourselves up to so much more in our spiritual experience. So I know you and I share a common experience that we went ungrounded for a little
Yeah.
bit. So could you tell me about, your calling into this time in your life and what beckoned you to the spiritual experience and kind of how that transition went from being really ungrounded into this beautiful kind of dichotomy you're in right now between the stars and the earth?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, I feel like the way it kind of unfolded for me is when I was younger. When I say younger, I mean like 6, 7 years old. Um, I had certain experiences that I remember of just like, and it looks a lot like what a lot of people have experienced in their younger years of like growing up on processed foods and
Mm,
that kind of a thing. And I feel like the whole diet and that kind of a thing is like kind not swept under the rug, but when it comes to spirituality and the spiritual community, and this isn't a judgment, this is just what I see in a lot of people, is they'll just unconsciously adopt the vegan dogma
mm,
and believe that that's healthy, right? And I'm not saying that anything about plant-based eating is right or wrong, but when it comes to diet, I was grown up a lot on processed foods and all of this, and that created a certain way of health, or I should say disease, you know?
yep.
So from the get go, I was not comfortable and feeling safe in my body because my body was not healthy because of this trauma, because of that experience, you know? And all of these things made me realize, or over time, that I was not living in my body because my body did not feel like a safe home, you know,
Mm,
because of the way the physical was developed, because of the trauma and all these energies, right? And then fast forward to about, I think it was 17, I had my first mushroom experience and it just blasted me open. And I was like, holy shit, what's going on? What's this life that I'm living? This doesn't feel in alignment with me and all of this. And then I blasted Pandora's box open, so to speak, with this psychedelic experience. And I've had many psychedelic experiences since then. But throughout the course of all of that, I was like, got super spiritual, so to speak, just meditate. Like my whole life became meditation, breath work, journaling, studying, da da da, all of this, right? And what I started to realize is I was not really paying attention to my body. Like you said, we live in these higher chakras. We're like, oh my gosh. And I feel like ultimately it's uh, an important part of the path to have that experience and go quote unquote unbalanced for a while to be able
mhm.
to access that and remember that and connect to that. But then there comes a time when, and necessarily there's not anything we quote unquote need to do, but if we truly want to live the best life possible and honor the perfection of divine creation, we're in these bodies and on this planet for a reason. And I mean, to say it simply, what feels really true for me is like if we're identifying too much with like, this is my star origin and this is that, that can very much lead to too far into like the spiritual ego, and we're not honoring who we are in this moment and who
Yeah.
we are as a human. Because long story short, it doesn't matter what planet you're from or what this you're from, we're all from source and we're all divine creators, right? So
Yeah.
we're just as much from earth as we are from this and from that and etc and etc. So the way it kind of unfolded for me is I was living up in these higher chakras and all of this, and my physical experience was reflecting that in the way of I wasn't present and grounded in my physical experience. So then creators like, oh, you're not here? Okay, it doesn't matter what goes on then. And then all this stuff happened and I'm like, well shit, I should live in my body. And that started to come in the form of this is when I started to realize I really needed to get more quote unquote serious, not serious, but more intentional about my healing in
Mm,
a real sense of clearing trauma from the body, and really listening to my body for the foods that I need to eat and how much food to eat. Because I feel like what happened for me, and I feel like a lot of people will resonate with this, is number one, we have this beautiful expansive experience of where we've been and who we are as souls. And the physical body, just from that perspective, it's denser. It's denser. It's more limiting, so to speak, at the initial, like when we compare, right? Because comparison is the thief of joy. So we say, look at this expansive experience. It's never going to touch where I'm at. And yeah, that's true. That's not why we're here. Comparison, we're never going to get there, right? So I kind of found myself going on this journey of how can I make the most of where I'm at, you know? And I started to learn a lot about the fact that from my own experience and my own studying and my own healing, that if we have trauma in the body, we're not going to live in our body, because it's like our body is a temple of our soul. And if the
Mhm.
body has uncomfortability, pain, crazy vibrations in that way, we're literally not going to live in the body, because it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel comfortable, right? So then the question became, how do I make this temple the best freaking temple ever, right?
Yeah.
So that came in the form of lots of breath work, certain healing modalities with plant medicine and food, because one thing I've realized is the foods that we eat um, have such a huge play on our vibration and our mental clarity and our emotions and all of that. And I was realizing there was this like connection between the emotional trauma was making me feel unsafe in my body. So then what also happened is I wasn't actually listening to my body and eating what my body needed in terms of amount of food and what kinds of food my body was asking for. Because if I did that, then I would be fully in my body, and then I would feel the trauma, and it was just this whole negative feedback loop. So then I was like, okay, well, I got to move through this. So then as I started to move through this, um, within all of this, because I could talk forever about this, within all of this, what I've realized is ultimately, Ascension is not about leaving our bodies and living in the higher chakras and woo being up here. Ascension is about grounding these frequencies in. Because really, what if we look at ascension and really understand that, what does that mean? What's really going on? The planet's vibration is raising. So if the planet's
Mhm.
vibration is raising, then we need to help the planet's vibration raise as a collective. And the only way to do that is to bring the frequencies in our bodies and into the earth. And the only way to do that is to be in our bodies, you know?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I love so much that you said that, because I think in our, our current narratives of spirituality, it's so fun to get lost in like the 5D consciousness and ascension and star
Yeah.
seeds and all of that stuff. And I love so much, like, we need the frequency of our bodies to help shift the frequency of the earth, and the body is the sacred container in which we do all of that. And
It's the conduit or the
yeah,
the, the vessel, literally.
yeah. And I love so much how you approach breath work in such a relatable but sacred way. How did you discover breath work, and how has it changed your life?
Oh, yeah. I love breath work. And when it comes to breath work for me, it started in a really funny way, to be honest with you. When I look back on it, it's like just really random, and like ultimately nothing's random, but to my mind, it's like really random. But so I was a touring musician for about 4 years when I was younger. So I was a vocalist, and I would tour and play these shows and do all of this. And what I started to realize is I wasn't able to finish my parts. And like I would write these awesome songs with all these words and all these cool vocalizations. But then I would get on stage, and then I would run out of breath and I wouldn't be able to do them.
Mm,
So then I started to realize this, the band started to realize this. And ultimately I was like, dude, I got to like work on my vocals. But really, what I have to do is work on my breath control to be able to do all of this. So that's what started to bring me awareness into my breath. And then I was like, I stumbled on YouTube to Wim Hof. And then I
mm,
literally would go into the restroom before a show and do this Wim Hof. And like, that was my pre-show ritual. And that's how it started. And I was like, man, I feel energized. I don't feel stage fright. I'm able to do all my parts. My voice sounds better. I was like, wow. And then just from what Wim Hof talked about of like health and alkalization and all of that, I had a desire in health and wellness. even when I was like so focused on just music, so to speak, because of all the physical things that I had experienced and all the physical suffering that I experienced. So I started to adopt this practice in my everyday life. And I started to see my health improve. And I started to realize that, oh my God, my emotional trauma is directly affecting my physical health. And I was like eating all these really good foods, but it wasn't until I started to really understand the flow of energy and all of this that I was able to fully heal many of the things that I was suffering from, like autoimmunity and etc. So that's kind of how it started 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. And then what happened is the universe is like, all right, you don't need to be touring and doing this band thing anymore. So there was a record contract, but I knew it wasn't right for me. So I quit. And then that just kind of took my attention away from like being on this hamster wheel, so to speak. And then I started to become more and more aware on a deeper level of all these like things I needed to heal, that I needed to clean out. So then I started having more connections to my guides, and then I went to my very first retreat with ayahuasca. And then in that, I discovered hape, which is a plant medicine that is used. It's non psychoactive. It's really beautiful medicine for like clearing the energy and all of this. And what started to happen is I started to have these connections with archangels and ascended masters and just my higher self, and then the plant teachers, right? Because in the plant medicine tradition, they talk about the plants are the teachers and the healers that we learn from. And then when that happened, there was this huge shift in my breath work where I literally was finding myself. I wasn't just doing Wim Hof anymore. I discovered transformational, holotrophic, shamanic breath work. I mean, there's so many words to describe it, but basically the practice of cyclical breathing for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, which creates a psychedelic, really deep healing. I just found myself where I would like have this calling to do this breathwork ceremony. Just it was just me. I wasn't like leading ceremonies or anything. I would literally just like have this calling, and then like I could feel the plants and the spirits of like my guides working with me, and they're like, okay, now you have to sage the room, and now you have to like protect the room and do this and that. And I'm like literally started learning how to run a ceremony just because I needed to heal myself. And that's really where I started to develop this level of um, I guess you could say firmness or willingness to move through the things that I was experiencing. Because a lot of what can happen, I realize, on this healing journey is we'll be aware of our trauma, but we're just afraid to feel it and really see what that looks like, to open that and move through that, because we have no idea. Like I had sexual trauma, and traumas are intense and painful, right? But I started to feel safe and like supported with this guidance that I had. So I started to move through that. And I don't necessarily recommend that people just like start diving in and healing on their own in that way. But that's kind of where I found myself, you know? And that's why I choose to do what I do now and helping people move through this, because it was really difficult to do on my own. But I did it and I learned a lot, you know?
That just brings up for me what Mary Magdalene says about how ascension is within your own heart, going
Uh
further
huh.
into your own heart. And so I think that's, a really beautiful full circle about how stepping into this, spiritually expansive version of us is really looking in the mirror and going deep within the darkness of our own heart and what we've experienced, whether it's just this lifetime or multiple lifetimes, if we're in that stage of remembering.
I just had this funny quote pop up as you were talking. Um, I feel like spirituality can be too focused on, and I'm not saying anyone in particular, but just as the collectiveness of like spiritual community, etc., can be too focused on like rainbows and butterflies and
Ugh,
unicorns,
yes.
when we need to balance that with mud and worms and dirt, you know,
Yes.
because that's just as spiritual.
I completely agree, and it's that, the dichotomy, the darkness and the light and the grittiness. I've found that frustration too with the spiritual community, or at least how others perceive the spiritual community, that it's like good vibes only. I'm going to decide to become spiritual and now my life is unicorns and rainbows. But it's really like when you make that decision and you actually look in the mirror, it's probably one of, so deeply painful and traumatic in terms of releasing and alchemizing those traumas that we've kept stored deep in our bodies. And I think it's not work that's for the faint of heart, and it's really a brave act and one of self-love to really look at yourself in that way and choose to face them and choose to heal them and release them in a way that is empowering and allows you to expand and evolve.
Yeah, exactly. And something within all of this that we're talking about that just came in as well is like, um, I feel like it's funny, and because like within spirituality we have all these guides and angels, right, that people talk about and connect with, and archangels specifically. And one of the archangels that I resonate with most is Archangel Michael. um, and I think it's hilarious how we like how the spiritual community can be all rainbows and unicorns, but then we look at Archangel Michael, for example, or archangels in general, these archetypes, and it's like, why is there these beings of love and light that literally are shield like in armor and carry swords?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
why is that a thing if everything's unicorn? And then why do we need armor and swords? It's like,
Yeah.
because there's shit and
Yeah.
darkness that goes on.
I don't know about you, but every time I see Archangel Michael, he's just chopping shit with his sword, just like
Yeah,
yeah,
I
he's got
love
a
him.
way. He's got an attitude with that sword, and it's amazing.
Yeah, the wrathful protectors, you know?
The one thing I also love that you said that came to me that I think we also can forget or have amnesia about when we're first waking up to our own power and our own divinity is how capable we are to heal ourselves with things that we've overlooked. Going back to this sparkly version of spirituality, I think it's really easy to get distracted by like, ooh, crystals, tarot cards. But wait, we have all of that, capability within our own hearts to sit and look at ourselves. And we have the earth and we have the power of our own breath, which is so deeply healing. And we also have
Yeah.
our guidance from our guides in spirit, and we also have the wisdom and the intelligence of mother earth. When you think about it and you remove all that other stuff, it's so beautiful how accessible it can become to heal ourselves when everything's right there, and literally like the breath is already running through us. We just have to bring that awareness back within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And gosh, brought up a lot for me to share.
Go
I love
ahead.
this. So the first thing that comes up is within A Course in Miracles, which is also kind of in my mind right now, connecting with like what Joe Dispenza teaches.
Mhm.
A Course in Miracles talks about true healing is healing of the mind, and if you believe it's something outside of yourself, it's because you don't fully believe and trust in the healing power of the mind in and of
Mm.
God, because all healing is truly of God and Creator. And then within that, that parallels with what Joe Dispenza talks about of like all healing comes from belief, right?
Mm,
Like if
mhm.
like
Yes.
he talked about this story in one of his books where someone had terminal cancer, and then I think it was like Jesus visited them in a vision, and oh my gosh, and then their tumors melted off in 48 hours, right? Because they believed in Jesus, or they believed in this healing ability, right? So it's like, even going back to what you said with the crystals and the tarot cards, and believe me, I got a lot of crystals and a lot of
Same.
tarot cards. Even in that, I think the important piece to remember with these kinds of things is, number one, crystals, and I feel like we understand this, but we don't fully always like, we don't always like bring full conscious awareness to. Crystals are living beings, just like the plants are living beings and the animals are living beings. Crystals are living beings too, and if you meditate and sit in the present and you open your heart, you can literally talk to these crystals and have this psychic connection with these crystals. So if a crystal's resonating with you, think of it more of like, hey, that person at this coffee shop, I'd like to talk with them. It's not like, oh, crystals and it's this thing. It's like, no, these are like beings that want to help and heal us. With the breath, um, this is something else I wanted to share. So often, the reason why I love the shamanic breath work and just breath work as a whole, and bioenergetics and somatic movement and all of this, is because it's very easy to be unaware of our breath, even when we're trying to be aware of our breath. And what I mean about that is, if we sit here right now and we're just like, focus on our breath, and we just breathe deeply and we connect to our breath, right? Say we've been holding on to a trauma for 10 years, and that's causing us to have a certain holding pattern in our nervous system within our solar plexus or something, right? And we're breathing deeply, and we're so used to that feeling in our solar plexus from that trauma that we don't even see it and we don't even feel it. And we're like, oh, I'm just breathing deeply. Breath awareness is not the full end all be all, because breath awareness doesn't bring awareness to the trauma and the things that in which our nervous system are feeling. Because ultimately it's like, if you're here and this is your 100%, right? But really your 100% is up here. You're not going to realize that if you're just creating awareness here, which is like, I feel like that would be more of like the feminine pole of healing and like awareness. But it's like, then we can bring more masculine ways of like moving the energy, and that's feminine too in a sense. But it's like the breath work really helps, because it's like we're working with our energy, and we're actually giving ourselves permission to have a tantrum, have a freak out, yell and scream and cry and punch the pillow and like do all this stuff, because that's what's blocking us. It's not because if you're building a business, for example, it's not because you're not creating enough content, or your content's not good enough, or this or that. It's because you're holding on to emotions. And I say that with the most love. We just need to move that. And then you become a quantum magnet, and you literally need do nothing. As they say in A Course in Miracles, I need do nothing. And then you remember your connection with Source, and you remember that everything is Source. As Jesus says, you become Christed when you see the Christ in everyone that you meet and everything you experience. And then you're just observing. And this goes back to before we started recording, we're talking about human design. The wholeness of human design, as the way I understand it, is to create a sense of passenger consciousness. So in the human design system, they call it the design, they call it the personality, and then the magnetic monopole. And these three pieces, it may sound like, well, what is that? But the way he breaks it down is like, think of the design. Your design is this unconscious way in which you are as a being in this vessel. And that's like a limousine or a car. And then the personality is like, I'm Joshua Michael, you're Leena, like whoever we think we are, and the way in which we interact, and like, I like these books, I like these crystals, like that kind of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the magnetic monopole, or our sense of direction and our sense of inner guidance. That's the driver. The just that intuition, that direction is the driver of the car. The personality, or we'll say limousine. And then the personality that we think we are and that we are observing, and that we're like, so the ego is not a bad thing. The ego is a necessary part of this experience, but within our own path, the ego is just sitting in the back of the limousine observing. And so often, what can happen is we think the ego is driving, but really what's happening when we look at it in truth is the ego's in the back of a limousine, and can have the tendency to be that asshole that's like, hey, do this and do that and do this. But the magnetic monopole, the sense of direction and intuitive guidance, is doing the thing. And it's like, so long as we just like observe and enjoy the ride, we get to where we need to go. And that's the need do nothing. That's what Lao Tzu talked about in Taoism. That's what all these things ultimately lead back to, is we are not the doer. The doer is Source. And Source isn't even the doer. Source is the happening.
Yeah. That goes deep, but it's true. It's really, we're here to observe and let things flow through us, but in our own healing work are acquiring these tools to allow that to happen. Because I think when there's so much blocks and shit in the way, that flow stops, very much like a river.
Yeah. Yes. I always talk about the river analogy.
It's the masculine tools that are, doing the work to pull out the sticks and the rocks and the beaver dams to help the river flow.
Exactly. Well, you just hit the nail on the head. Exactly. I
Mic
love
drop.
that you brought that up, because I literally always bring that up. Like, it's a river. It's literally a river.
It's funny because my analogy that my guide showed me was like a hoarder's living room with just stacked up boxes, and the work is like clearing out box by box to create space to to
That's a
have
good
like
one too.
your Marie Kondo-esque living room.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's even better, so to speak, in the sense of like understanding that this is our home, this body is our home, and if our living room's full of shit, we're
Yes.
never going to want to be in the living room.
Yep.
And we don't even know that we have a whole bookshelf with crystals and and tarot cards on
Yep.
it because there's all these fucking boxes covering it.
Yep, and just decades. Like, I don't need that stuff anymore, but it's like deeply piled under all these other boxes that I didn't even know I had until I actually looked.
Whew.
Yep, so
Beautiful.
much work. Well, it's been such a
Uh-huh.
pleasure having you on my show. I like to end with wise words for anyone listening who just needs, that encouragement to step into their best selves today. What are your wise words to end on?
I mean, to put very simply, this is for those listening and just for everyone that's tuning into this. You are the medicine. You are the creator of your experience, and you have the ability to choose what you want to experience and what you don't want to experience. You are the only one that can save yourself. You are the only one that can say it's time to heal. You are the only one that says it's enough is enough and let's do something different. So remember that whether you have a coach or a healer, or you go to a ceremony or whatever that looks like, those are just mirrors and reflections for your own empowerment and your own divinity. And no one outside of you is ever going to heal you because they can't. No one can give you anything. No one can heal you. No one can take care of you. And that belief is going to keep you blocked until you remember you are this healer. You are the savior. You are your own. You are the medicine.
And lastly, tell everyone where they can find you and what you are working on at the moment.
Awesome. So I find myself really kind of going a lot on Instagram. So you can follow me on Instagram at Joshua Michael 1147. And as far as what I'm working on right now, I just opened a new program called the Miracle Medicine Mentorship. And it's a 3-month program to really teach you all the things that we've been talking about today in terms of grounding and integrating. And when I say integrating, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to have had a plant medicine experience, but if you did, that's even better, so to speak, because that's more integration, teaching us how to fully be in our grounded human experience, how to work with our guides, and how to clean the slate with our connection to God, to Creator, and ultimately step into this fullness of joy and peace and abundance and like enjoyment of this experience and seeing that reflected and grounded in instead of dreaming and having a dream. What about like we're just living that? And that's ultimately what this is about. And you can find more about that on my Instagram. And I'd love for you to just send me a message and let's connect. I love connecting. And yeah, so that's where you can find me and what's going
Beautiful.
on in my world.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved this. This is great.